If you're watching this, you have probably been looking for a while and seen all the different ads. Get 150K to 200K per year in rent, make 190K per year, and all the nonsense that goes along with the advertising. And I'll make a call here, 99% of it is all bullshit. Hello, property navigators. In the heart of our discussion today, we dive into the NDIS, or the National Disability Insurance Scheme. We will navigate through the complexity surrounding the NDIS and operations of the NDIA to where the role of being a property investor in the space is understood. There's a ton of acronyms for me to explain and a lot of info for me to get through, so we need to rip in. But first, you need to know this is a pretty complex topic in its totality. So I'll be going through it as thoroughly as I can, but without getting so granular that it becomes a 20-minute video, which is easy to do on this topic. Let's go. What is the NDIS and how is it structured? Well, firstly, you are not buying into the NDIS or building a house for them. Nothing even close. So I'll start by explaining everything for you from the ground up. The NDIS, or National Disability Insurance Scheme, provides funding to eligible people with disability to gain greater independence, access their community, find meaningful work, to live independently, and ultimately have an improved quality of life. The NDIS also connects anyone with disability to services in their community, including connections to doctors, community groups, sporting clubs, support groups, libraries, and schools, as well as providing information about what support is provided by each state and territory government. The NDIS now supports over 500,000 Australians with disability to access the services and supports they need to live their best life. So in essence, it operates as a funding scheme for a spectrum of disability services, much more beyond the confines of just housing. The scheme provides a vast range of support services and day-to-day care needs for people with disability across Australia. This isn't just about providing a roof over heads. It's about nurturing an environment where every individual can thrive, irrespective of their challenges. To explain the NDIS very simply, you could think of it almost as a funding and governance body. Next in line, we have the National Disability Insurance Agency, or the NDIA. The National Disability Insurance Agency is an independent statutory agency whose role is to implement the NDIS. So the NDIS is the bucket of funding and governance, and the NDIA manages and distributes that funding among those that apply and are approved. The agency is the heartbeat of the scheme, distributing funds to participants, who are the people with disability seeking funding for their supports, ensuring they can access the essential support services they need. The NDIA holds the funding, employs the planners, and carries out assessments for those seeking funding. Now, the NDIS funding covers a range of support services for those with disability that need it. It also provides funding for accommodation or housing for people with disability to live, and this is called Specialist Disability Accommodation, or SDA housing. It is this type of house that you invest in when you see NDIS housing referred to. NDIS housing isn't a thing. SDA housing is. Very important to distinguish. When people with disability get funding to live in these SDA homes, they also get funding for the support services they need to live independently in these homes. This provides them with support workers to help with everyday tasks such as cooking, cleaning, accessing the community, to do activities and things that all of us like to do. Understanding SDA homes. There are currently about 35,000 people living in specialist disability accommodation. Now, these homes are specifically designed and built to cater to the needs of people with disability. Now, there are 4 SDA categories or levels that have build standards or requirements that need to be met in order to be certified and registered as being compliant. Now, the 4 SDA categories are: number 1, improved livability. Now, these homes are tailored for individuals with sensory or cognitive impairments. These homes offer enhanced physical access and features aimed at simplifying navigation and daily living, from visual cues for the visually impaired to structural modifications for those with cognitive challenges. Every detail is designed with a purpose. The next level, we have fully accessible. Now, these properties are for those with significant physical impairments. These houses are meticulously planned to ensure wheelchair access, step-free showers, and a myriad of other features that empower residents to move freely and live independently. Number 3 is robust. Now, this type of house is designed with durability and safety in mind. Robust homes cater to individuals whose behaviours might lead to property damage or personal injury. These homes are fortresses of safety, minimising risks and providing a secure environment that supports the well-beings of its residents. And the fourth level is high physical support. These properties are for individuals requiring 24/7 personal care due to severe physical impairments. High physical support homes are equipped with features such as ceiling hoists and emergency power solutions for medical equipment, and these homes are crafted to ensure that complex care needs are met. Now, each of these four categories of SDAs is funded to participants at different levels, obviously due to the different levels of build specifications required for different participant needs. The role of the investor. Now, very different to standard residential property investing, when you decide to invest in an SDA home, you aren't just buying into an SDA home. For many, it's about building them. It's about creating environments that don't just meet basic needs, but elevate the quality of life for people with disability. As a property investor, your mission extends beyond the financial, and you probably need to get your head around this. You are investing in humanity, in the dignity of independence, and the transformative power of tailored support. And I think you should have that mindset and ethos behind it. Now you understand how the NDIS is structured to some degree and how funding for the rent portion of participants' plans operates, let's move on to explaining the difference between regular property investment and operating in the NDIS space by providing specialist disability accommodation. Firstly, these are not silver bullet investments. They do have high income potential, but you have to be prepared for some unique challenges. Here I'm going to talk to you about demand versus vacancy and what this means for you. Then we'll talk about tenancy, which is super important too. Demand versus vacancy. As you have probably figured out by now, there's a lot of companies offering to charge you and teach you how to invest in NDIS housing, or just to do it for you. But again, remember, you aren't investing in NDIS housing. You're investing in a specialist disability accommodation. Now, these companies will be telling you there's huge demand for NDIS housing, and I'll agree. There is a lot of built-up demand for particular categories of SDA housing in particular areas, and that's what you need to make sure you look into. It's super important. Making sure you are building the right category of SDA house in the right area where your participant need is. You just can't have a mentality of build it and they will come as your long-term strategy here, as it could really come back to bite you. An article in the Financial Review explains that 60% of SDA houses that are being built currently are in the high physical support category, but only 27% of participants are funded for this level. The article then explains that at maturity of the scheme, only 20% of SDA participants are estimated to be funded for high physical support homes. The opposite is happening in the improved livability category, which is the highest demand category but has the least number of homes being built. This is just poor supply and demand due diligence on the part of most of these investors. I'll cover off why I think this is happening later on in the video when we go through funding and cash flow. The demand right now for SDA houses is strong as there is a pent-up demand. For example, there are many hospitals that have over 200 of their beds taken up by people that could be living in SDA homes, but these homes don't exist yet. Therefore, there's thousands of people eligible just to come out of the hospitals alone, plus thousands and thousands of others that are still living in group homes or with their parents. But when this pent-up demand is met, the requirement for more SDA just won't be necessary. That makes sense. It's basic supply and demand. There's probably about 3 to 5 years left max before we reach that equilibrium point. Now, don't be fooled. The government absolutely wants this space to get oversupplied, because that's when the NDIS will be able to lower the amount of funding they offer participants to live in SDA homes, because there'll be more supply and ultimately competition. They care about housing participants that need it, not your returns, but they know that they have to pay what they're currently offering to stimulate and entice investors to build these properties. While there is a strong demand in the right locations for the right properties at the moment, you also need to know about vacancy. Now, I'll cover this off in more detail shortly, but you must understand that just because you have a 3-bedroom house, it does not mean you're going to have all 3 bedrooms tenanted with participants with NDIS funding for an SDA home. You may always have, or majority of the time have, a spare room that is vacant. Why? Well, that brings us to the next point of tenancy. So by now you know that your tenants in these SDA properties are not your regular residential tenants. They're vulnerable people that require support in most parts of their day-to-day life, and they require a purpose-built environment to live their best life. So you can't just advertise on realestate.com for tenants. If you remember at the start of the video, I explained that participants in the NDIS that are provided funding for SDA homes are also funded for support services. These support services might include a support worker being in the home 24 hours per day, taking care of day-to-day needs of those 2 or 3 people living in the house. Now, these support services are provided by Supported Independent Living, or SIL organisations, that are paid through the funding granted to the participants in the house. Your SDA will be run by the SIL organisation that provides this day-to-day care, but you do not pay them. This is how you will get tenants in your home. So if you're going to invest in an SDA, make sure the building provider or company you go through is very reputable and has tenanting partners lined up ready to jump on using your property to house participants that will be provided support services by a SIL. Don't try and manage all this individually yourself, especially if you don't know the space. Participants that want funding to live in an SDA property must apply to the NDIA to get assessed and then approved for this funding, and not everyone is eligible. And those that are approved are funded at different levels, particular to the type of SDA property category their assessment has ultimately concluded they are funded to live in. Because of this process that participants must go through, the NDIA can take anywhere from 6 months or longer. For many, it takes 12+ months to properly assess, approve, and then fund participants for their SDA funding. It can be quite a long process and lots is involved depending on the participant. For example, writing behaviour management plans for individuals can take 6 to 12 months. So there's lots of moving parts, and this is inescapable. Every participant must go through this process, and because these participants are who your tenants will be, it directly affects your vacancy in the property. So while demand is good, the vacancy and process to attain tenants can be arduous. So you need to be diligent on asking lots of questions about this and understanding how it all goes. Now, if you're going to invest in this space, you need to have a realistic idea on the income you can get from your property, and more importantly, how it is structured. So let's talk about participant funding, cash flows, capital growth, and what even a realistic income looks like. Now, this video isn't to run you through exactly how much participants are funded to live in SDAs. If you're watching this, you have probably been looking for a while and seen all the different ads. Get 150K to 200K per year in rent, make 190K per year, and all the nonsense that goes along with the advertising. And I'll make a call here, 99% of it is all bullshit. If you're talking to companies or SDA providers about building, be wary and make sure they are being real, because there's a couple traps here that I'll explain. Let's start by understanding the 4 categories that are now on screen. Each of these are funded at different levels. Let's use the example I used above, where I mentioned that 60% of SDA houses that are being built in the high physical support category, but only 27% of participants are funded for this level. Well, there's a reason for that, and it's because high physical support SDAs receive the highest amount of funding for participants to live in. So everyone is building them because they want their share of the profits to be made. Well, sadly, what do you think is going to happen when there is double the amount of high physical support SDAs than what's needed? There'll be way too much supply. I then explained the opposite is happening in the improved livability category, which ironically is the lowest funded category. So there's not so many investors interested. Be clever and not greedy. Understand this stuff. Almost every advertisement I see spruiking NDIS properties has maxed out the rental return numbers to sell you the idea. For example, I saw an ad spruiking a 4-bedroom SDA home in the robust category. Now, the robust category is for high cognitive impairment, and the houses must be built to a high spec. The problem is, the way the yields had been calculated in this ad, it used an example of calculation of the yield based on the 4 bedrooms in this robust SDA all being fully tenanted. However, the thing is, this is never going to happen. Participants with such a high level of impairment that require living in the robust category rarely live with more than one housemate. And so many times I've seen that they may even live by themselves while being provided 24/7 care by support workers. Imagine if you trusted this company, believed their ad, and then were left with a 4-bedroom robust SDA with only 1 tenant. The problem is, the ads and companies are misleading you, but the way the ad is created, it isn't illegal. You just didn't do your homework to know the ins and outs, and that's on you, I'm sorry. To know how all this may affect you is responsible investing. It's responsible so you can plan and stay in control of your cash flows and provide yourself realistic income figures. Just don't believe what you're being told or what you see in ads. And lastly, be careful that you are considering future capital growth on the property when you invest in this sector. So many companies are churning out SDA properties in areas that realistically not many people would want to live in. Think about this. Would you want to live a 30-minute drive away from any amenities or decent activities or places to go with things to do? No. Well, then why would anyone else, especially people with disability? Think long term. You aren't going to get any decent capital growth building an SDA property in the middle of nowhere just because land is cheap and you expect people to come and live in it. You will get tenants in the short term while there is still this undersupply, but long term you may run into trouble when more enticing SDAs in better locations are on offer. Many of these companies putting out the ads spruiking big profits and misleading you in how many rooms can be rented out consecutively will be the guys building you a property in Timbuktu. So do your homework. I hope this overview of the NDIS has helped you consider a few more details before deciding on investing into an SDA property. There's lots to consider, so feel free to give me a call anytime to run over any more details or questions you might have. Our phone number's in the description. If you enjoyed this video, well, you need to check this one out where we cover a bunch of things that investors worry about that they really shouldn't, and we go through them in great detail. Till next time, happy property navigating.